The Republic was already dying when Lucius Cornelius Sulla first marched beneath her banners. The Senate still met in marble halls and the people still shouted in the Forum, but something essential had cracked. The soul of Rome, that ancient blend of duty, austerity, and fear of kings, was rotting beneath a crust of gold and blood. Conquests had made her rich, but not wise. Her legions fought not for the Senate, but for the men who paid them. Her politicians, once bound by mos maiorum, now auctioned laws like grain in a marketplace. And into this decaying world was born a man with cold blue eyes and a will like iron drawn from under the Tiber. Sulla's family was noble in name but poor in purse, patricians without prestige. He learned early that Rome did not reward birth alone. You had to claw your way up from the dirt. So he studied men. Watched how they moved, how they lied, how they conquered. His features were handsome, his manners refined, but beneath the fine Greek education and the practiced smile burned a glacier, slow-moving, vast, and deadly. He attached himself to Gaius Marius, the great general of the age, a man of no noble birth but unmatched military brilliance. Marius had broken the mold of the Roman army, opening its ranks to the poor and promising them spoils. He made soldiers loyal not to the Senate, but to himself. And Rome loved him for it, for a time. Sulla served loyally under Marius in the Jugurthine War. It was he, not Marius, who orchestrated the final capture of King Jugurtha through guile and bribery. But when the triumph came, Marius took the glory. Sulla said nothing, but he did not forget. The wound festered quietly, beneath his cool gaze. The cracks widened. Rome was at war on all fronts. The social war erupted, an uprising of Italy's long-abused allies who demanded the rights of citizenship. Sulla proved himself a fearsome commander, winning victories where others faltered. His discipline was cold, unflinching, almost surgical. He gave orders that sent thousands to die, and watched with a stillness that made lesser men uneasy. In those years, something changed in Sulla. He saw that Rome no longer listened to words. That the Senate feared mobs and mobs worshipped war heroes. That tribunes and generals, not laws, ruled now. If Rome could be saved, it would not be with debate or reason. It would be with force, unrelenting and pure. He was elected consul in 88 BCE, riding a wave of victories and upper-class support. He was tasked with leading Rome's forces against Mithridates, the king of Pontus, a cunning eastern monarch who had slaughtered 80,000 Romans in a single coordinated night. It was the kind of war that could make a man a legend. But as Sulla prepared for the campaign, his old commander returned. Marius, now an old man bloated with bitterness and ambition, wanted the command for himself. He allied with the populist tribune Sulpicius, who passed a law stripping Sulla of his command and handing it to Marius. Sulla's response would change the history of the world. When the Senate lost its honor, and the people lost their shame, a man of ice arose, to cleanse the house with flame. Not for justice. Not for peace. But for Rome, as he believed. Though in saving her from chaos, it was law that he bereaved. The decree had passed like thunder through the streets. Gaius Marius, once the savior of Rome, would now lead her legions eastward. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, lawful consul, decorated general, was to step aside. The news reached him not through Senate envoy or formal decree, but through rumor, shouted by a trembling courier, whose eyes dared not meet his. Sulla sat still. He gave no outburst, no complaint. He simply rose and walked among his camp. Men, hardened from the social war, veterans of pain and drought and blood, watched him in silence. And Sulla, always precise, always methodical, did the unthinkable. He spoke to them not as citizens, not as Romans, but as soldiers, their commander, betrayed. He reminded them of their oaths, not to the Senate, but to him. And they answered. No Roman army had ever marched on Rome itself. It was sacrilege. It was madness. It was treason. But Sulla, in his bone-deep certainty, did not flinch. He turned the legions toward the capital, their bronze eagles now shadows over the city of laws. Panic swept through Rome. Senators fled. The tribune Sulpicius was hunted down and killed. Marius escaped, barely, through the Tiber, mud-soaked and humiliated, a general without an army, a lion clawing at the bars of age. Sulla entered the city not as a conqueror, but as a physician wielding a cauterizing flame. He restored order, punished rebellion, and then, astonishingly, left. He had not come to rule. He had come to claim what was his, the eastern campaign against Mithridates. With his authority reaffirmed, he boarded ship and vanished into the east. But power, once seized, is not so easily returned to the box. And Rome, left in his absence, was not healed, it festered. Marius returned from exile like a ghost rising from a tomb. Old, yes, but rage had made him cunning. He allied with the consul Cinna, another populist, and together they incited the mob. Sulla's supporters were slaughtered in the streets. Senators were dragged from their homes and hacked to pieces. Blood ran through the forum like water after a storm. Heads of enemies were displayed on pikes, an old custom reborn in horror. Marius made himself consul, for the 7th time. The old warhorse had won. But his victory was short-lived. Days after his final triumph, he died. Some said of fever, others whispered of madness. Either way, the storm he unleashed had only just begun. From far away in Greece, Sulla received the news with a grim, quiet smile. Rome was burning again. The Republic, if it still lived, now bled from both wrists, torn between populist vengeance and patrician terror. He looked east, where Mithridates waited with armies and intrigue, but his thoughts wandered west. He would finish this war quickly. And then he would return. Not with warning. Not with mercy. But with judgment. For the betrayal of Marius was no longer just personal. It had become metaphysical, a violation of Rome itself. The city could no longer survive on compromise. One man would have to bend it back into shape. Or break it cleanly. And Sulla, with his iron calm and frostbitten soul, was prepared to do either. When two men seek one glory, Rome must pay the price. One aged, drowning in his past. One young, cold as ice. The Senate fled. The people screamed. The eagles turned their head. And in the forum's marble halls, the constitution bled. It began in the dust of Campania, with one legion turning, then another, not east toward Mithridates, but north, toward the red-roofed skyline of the eternal city. Rome had always been sacred ground to soldiers. Weapons were forbidden within its Imperium, the invisible wall of law and tradition that separated war from peace, army from republic. But Sulla, the lawful consul stripped of his command by force, declared the gods were now on his side, that the first sin had been Marius, not his own. He would not be breaking the republic. He would be restoring it. The men followed. Not just because they were loyal, but because they knew Rome had changed. It no longer fed its veterans. It betrayed its commanders. And Sulla paid in gold. As they marched, the roads emptied. Messengers fled ahead, spreading panic like wildfire. Senators argued whether to resist or negotiate. But it was too late. The laws that once bound Rome had become parchment in the wind. Sulla was coming, not as a rebel, but as a new kind of Roman, a commander who no longer asked for power. He simply took it. He arrived without siege engines, without famine or fire. He walked through the gates with his soldiers in perfect formation, their discipline unbroken, their silence more terrifying than shouting. The people of Rome watched from doorways and rooftops. They had seen invasions before, Gauls, Cimbri, and Teutons. But never Romans upon Romans. Never a civil war led not by barbarians, but by their own sons. There was little resistance. A few tribunes called for arms. One attempted to rally a defense on the Esquiline hill. He was cut down before finishing his speech. Blood soaked the paving stones. The Republic shivered. Sulla walked into the Curia Hostilia and took his seat. Not with violence. Not with ceremony. He simply sat, like a man returning to his rightful chair. Those senators who remained upright looked away. He passed laws swiftly, reversing the decrees of Sulpicius, restoring his command in the east, declaring his march lawful by necessity. Justice, he said, had been corrupted. And corruption required steel. He did not remain long. There was no grand speech, no crowning moment. He named loyal men to key posts, ensured the enemies of order were dead or scattered, and then departed for the east, to fight Mithridates, the war that had sparked it all. But something had shifted, irrevocably. For Rome had now seen its own legions turned inward. The Republic had bent, and not snapped, under the tread of marching feet. And in that bending was a lesson. One that would not be forgotten. If armies could decide laws, then the sword had become a pen. And the general, the new legislator. Sulla may have left the city, but his ghost remained in every forum speech, every Senate vote, every whisper of, "What if he comes back?" And he would. But the next time, it would not be to restore the Republic. It would be to remake it. The gates swung open, not with war, but with decay. No foreign horde, just Roman boots that walked the Roman way. The laws still spoke, but only air escaped their brittle form. For when the legions enter first, the Senate cannot storm. The eastern wind carried Sulla's fleet across a sea as old as myth. Behind him, Rome smoldered, bleeding from old wounds torn anew. Before him, the east stirred with cunning, Pontus, Mithridates, and the strange, luxurious cruelty of Greek Asia. He was not a young man anymore, but he felt a certain rebirth with each league gained from the chaos he left behind. He did not call it exile. He called it cleansing. Mithridates VI of Pontus had declared war not by army, but by atrocity. In a single orchestrated night, the Asiatic Vespers, he had murdered every Roman and Italian across the Greek cities. 80,000 dead. Some sources claimed more. Families torn from dinner tables, merchants strangled in their own stalls, children drowned in harbor waters. Mithridates wore the massacre like a crown. To the Greeks, he was a liberator. To Rome, a serpent. Sulla saw no difference. Rebellion was rebellion, whether cloaked in freedom or faith. And he was coming with fire. His campaign in the east was brutal, swift, and efficient. He moved through Boeotia and Thessaly like a surgeon, each city a vein to be opened, cleansed, and cauterized. Athens resisted, foolishly. They had declared for Mithridates and mocked Sulla from their walls, their philosophers calling him a barbarian. He answered with siege. Winter came. Supplies vanished. His men starved. He sold the treasures of Delphi, stripped sacred temples, minted gods into coin to feed his army. When Athens fell, Sulla showed restraint, by his standards. Only a few thousand were butchered. The rest were enslaved or spared to serve as examples. He let them live so they could remember. At Kyrenia and Orchomenus, Sulla defeated Mithridates' generals decisively, even when outnumbered 2-1. His formations held like iron scaffolding. His cavalry broke lines like hammer blows. The east trembled. Mithridates sued for peace. The terms were harsh: tribute, hostages, surrender of fleets. But Sulla, though victorious, was not greedy. He had one eye turned west. Rome had descended into madness in his absence. Marius was dead, but his allies lived on, Cinna, Carbo, and a new generation of populists who wore vengeance like armor. The Senate was muzzled. The Republic a hostage. Sulla's laws had been reversed. His allies executed. His property seized. His statues torn down. From the heights of Pergamon, Sulla received dispatches, secret letters smuggled through pirate fleets and bribed captains. They told of a Rome unrecognizable. A republic now ruled by gangs, tribunician terror, and the blood of nobles who could not flee fast enough. He read each one in silence, the sun rising red behind his shoulder, and said to no one in particular. They want me to return. It would not be like before. No restoration this time. He had learned the folly of leaving power behind. If he came again, he would come not as consul, but as Rome's final cure. He settled the East in haste. Replaced governors. Sent tribute to the temples he'd robbed. Issued coins stamped with his face, not Rome's. He no longer asked permission. His word was law, carried on spears and sealed in blood. And then he turned back toward Italy. The sea was quiet, as if it too held its breath. In marble lands where gods once spoke, a Roman walked alone. With temples burning at his back, and steel to shape the throne. Though far from Rome, her cries still reached across the salted air. And with them came a reckoning, more cruel than it was fair. Rome had always been a city of blood. The very soil beneath the Forum was dark with it, royal blood, plebeian blood, Gallic blood, senatorial blood. But what happened in the years of Sulla's absence was not war. It was a purge. A scream without end. A revolution devouring itself. It began with Marius, not in body, for he was dead, but in spirit, coiled around the minds of the desperate. His allies, led by Lucius Cornelius Sulla, took up the old general's banner and unfurled it over the city like a storm cloud. The Senate, weakened and leaderless, cowered behind doors. The optimates were hunted like wolves. Marius' partisans, emboldened by rage and mob support, ruled the streets. Sulla's name became a curse. They tore down his statues. Confiscated his lands. Murdered his friends and burned his villas to ash. His wife fled into hiding. His son barely escaped with his life. His bloodline was marked for extinction. Rome became a theater of execution. Each morning, bodies appeared, dragged from their homes, strangled in the gutters, hacked apart and tossed into the Tiber. Some were senators, others mere clients, accused of sympathy. The mobs needed little excuse. Property was seized. Trials were abolished. Vengeance became governance. Cinna, consul year after year in defiance of law, declared himself the defender of the people. But he ruled not with law, but with fear. He revived the old Marian cry, the Senate was corrupt, the aristocracy treacherous, the republic only safe when cleansed by blood. And behind it all, whispered, never spoken aloud, was the fear, what happens when Sulla returns? He would return. He always had. The East had not consumed him. The rumors said he had defeated Mithridates. That he had gathered more legions. That his ships were massing along the Adriatic coast. The mere idea of his return sent tremors through the city. Some prepared defenses. Others fled. Still others doubled down, believing they had to finish what Marius had started before Sulla could set foot on Italian soil again. Cinna planned to meet Sulla with force. He raised armies, stationed troops along the coast, drilled conscripts with urgency and bile. But the gods had their own plans. In a mutiny, his own soldiers turned on him, frustrated by poor leadership and fearing Sulla more than loving Cinna. They beat him to death on the eve of departure. The headless regime staggered on. Gnaeus Papirius Carbo, a man of lesser spine and greater cunning, took the helm. He was no ideologue, only a survivor. He played at defending Rome but negotiated in secret, bribed where he could, executed where he must. But he was not Marius. And he was not Sulla. As Sulla's ships neared Brundisium, they were not met with resistance. They were welcomed. Town after town, city after city, opened their gates. Some out of fear. Others out of hatred for the chaos Marius' allies had wrought. And with Sulla came not only veterans, but new names, names that would echo long after the marble of the Republic cracked. Crassus, rich beyond comprehension. Pompey, young and fierce, called Magnus by his soldiers before Rome ever gave him a title. Men who followed not for duty, but for destiny. Sulla was no longer simply a man. He was an idea. An answer to disorder. A god of cold restoration. And as he marched north, past the olive groves and crumbling villas of central Italy, the earth did not shake. But Rome did. The lion dies, but not his roar, it echoes through the flame. And in his shadow others kill, then justify his name. When justice hides and order sleeps, the tyrant's mask is worn. By men who claim to save the world, with every oath they've torn. The land remembered his footsteps. The Appian Way, once so proud in its symmetry, now cracked beneath the iron weight of returning legions. Dust rose behind Sulla like smoke from prophecy. But this was no longer a return of a magistrate. It was the descent of reckoning. Sulla disembarked at Brundisium in 83 BCE, not with one army, but with an avenging host. Veterans from the east followed him with quiet loyalty. New legions joined him not because they loved him, but because they feared what Rome had become without him. With him marched Marcus Licinius Crassus, who had raised his own force with gold looted and promised. And the boy, Pompey, just 23, already battle-hardened and hungering for glory, bringing 3 legions on his own initiative. Sulla welcomed them with that half-smile he reserved for useful ambition. Rome, meanwhile, had no plan. The Senate remained hostage to Marian loyalists. Carbo schemed, Lucius Junius Brutus Damasippus purged. They accused each other of cowardice, and in doing so, lost the city's soul. Sulla didn't sprint. He advanced like a glacier, calculated, ruthless, patient. He didn't need to take Rome at once. He needed to break her will. Each city along the coast watched the clouds and chose. Capua surrendered. Then Nola. Then Firmum. His legions grew. His reputation swelled like a storm. When resistance came, it came in scattered winds, isolated consular armies with no cohesion. Carbo fled north. Young Gaius Marius, son of the legend, consumed by his father's ghost, gathered men in Etruria but lacked his father's iron. In battle after battle, Sulla cracked their lines like old bone. At the Colline Gate, just outside Rome's walls, the final horror came. It was dusk when the two forces clashed, Marian loyalists outnumbering Sulla's men nearly 2-1. But numbers were no match for belief. His veterans held the line with eerie calm, fighting not for spoils but for revenge, for memory, for the shape of Rome that had been stolen from them. The right wing buckled, and for a moment it seemed the spell might break. But Sulla appeared there, in person, his crimson cloak unmistakable, sword drawn, eyes fixed on the chaos. He said nothing. His presence was command enough. The line held. Then it advanced. Then it became massacre. By dawn, the Tiber ran red. Rome opened her gates not with celebration, but with exhausted silence. She had seen many conquerors. But this one did not arrive with laurels or mercy. He entered as a surgeon enters a gangrenous limb, to cut, not to soothe. The first to die were the obvious enemies. Then came the suspected enemies. Then the inconvenient. Sulla did not rage. He did not scream. He issued orders. One by one, the names were compiled. The reckoning had begun. In the Curia, senators whispered of peace, of reconciliation, of restoration. But Sulla no longer listened to whispers. He was not returning power. He was building a new Rome from fire. He marched not fast, but sure as death, and cold as winter's breath. Each step a funeral bell for law, each gaze a kind of death. They called him tyrant, savior, fiend, depending where they knelt, asterisk. But none denied the fire he brought, nor what the ashes felt. The Forum had never been silent. But after Sulla returned, it spoke only in screams and whispers. The statues of old gods watched as names were nailed to the rostra, lists inked in blood, scratched in haste, posted in daylight like festival announcements. Except these were no invitations. They were proscriptions. Rome had no precedent for what came next. Yes, there had been purges. There had been murders. Civil war always brings with it the harvest of grudges. But Sulla did not simply kill. He systematized. He bureaucratized death. He made it Roman. Each morning, new names. Senators, equestrians, generals, poets, jurists, and sometimes men with no reputation at all, only the misfortune of wealth or association. Their names were read aloud. Their properties seized. Their children disinherited. Their murderers rewarded. To kill a proscribed man was not a crime. It was an act of civic virtue. The killer received a portion of the victim's estate. Informants flourished. Neighbors turned on neighbors. Slaves whispered in the ears of guards. A man might go to sleep a citizen and awaken an outlaw, hunted through alleys he once called home. Heads were brought to Sulla daily. He did not flinch. He did not look away. The heads were displayed before the Curia, a grisly roll call of the Republic's dissolution. Some names were enemies. Others were debts. Still others, warnings. None were spared for pleas. The city became a graveyard without tombstones. Blood trickled down the marble steps of temples. The Tiber flowed slower, clogged with corpses. Cicero, young, sharp-tongued, still naive, said nothing in public. He watched. He listened. He learned. Others fled. Those who stayed learned silence. And through it all, Sulla remained serene. He said it was justice. That the Republic had nearly died because it had lost the courage to defend itself. That terror was not cruelty, but a cure. Rome had become diseased, its body poisoned with corruption, its limbs paralyzed by cowardice. And so he cut. Not with joy. But with conviction. Privately, he dined well. He laughed. He quoted Greek poets. He met his wife, Valeria, with polite affection. He took long walks through his gardens, stepping over the very earth that drank daily of Roman blood. And he built. Amid the executions, Sulla restructured the courts. Restored senatorial power. Filled magistracies with his men. Rebalanced provinces. Reformed the priesthoods. He spoke often of order, harmony, the ancient ways. But his hand was everywhere. He was not restoring the Republic. He was creating a new one, with himself as its architect, its conscience, and, if necessary, its executioner. By the end, the lists had grown so long they blurred. Some names were duplicated. Others vanished before they were read. A few, a select few, bought their way back. But most simply disappeared. When it was over, Rome was quieter. Not healed. Not whole. But hollowed out. And Sulla stood above it all, not like a king. Kings ruled by inheritance. He ruled by necessity. When laws are penned in silence, and scrolls unroll with death. When mercy chokes and justice hides, and truth has lost its breath. Then rises one who swears to cleanse, with blade and ash and flame. And carves his version of the law, with every cursed name. He did not call himself king. He did not need to. The word was repugnant to Roman ears, a ghost of Tarquin, a shiver from the age of chains. But what Sulla became was something older than monarchy and colder than tyranny. He was dictator, not for 6 months, as tradition demanded, but without term limit. Dictator legibus faciendis edi re publici constituendi causa, to make laws and to settle the Republic. A title as long as it was absolute. And Rome accepted it. Because the people were tired. The Senate was broken. The mob had lost its fire. After so many murders, so many betrayals, a man who promised to end it all, even if by force, seemed like peace. Sulla did not rest on fear alone. He governed. He rewrote Rome. He began with the Senate, that ancient body which had once ruled the world with gestures and gravitas. He purged it, refilled it, and expanded it. He added hundreds of new members, many his own officers and allies, elevating them to senatorial rank not by lineage but by loyalty. The Senate now served him, but it also stabilized the state. It had structure. It had teeth. It could outlive him. Next, he crippled the tribunes. For centuries, the tribunate had been the voice of the plebs, a sacred office that could veto laws, challenge the Senate, and summon revolution. It was the office Marius had weaponized. It was the office that had once driven Sulla from power. So he gutted it. He passed laws forbidding tribunes from proposing legislation without Senate approval. He barred them from holding higher office in the future. The tribunate became a political graveyard, a dead end for ambition. It survived in name, but not in power. He reformed the courts, placing judicial authority back into senatorial hands. He codified laws on extortion, corruption, and provincial abuse. He limited grain subsidies to prevent demagogues from buying votes. He reinstated the cursus honorum, the formal ladder of office, enforcing age minimums and proper sequence. No more meteoric rises. No more mobs elevating tribunes to kings overnight. In the provinces, he curbed abuse. Governors were now bound by stricter financial laws. But the true power lay in Rome. Sulla understood what others had forgotten: Rome was not the world, but it was the heart of it. Control the heart, and the limbs obey. And yet, amid the reforms and renovations, a strange quiet settled over him. He did not live in palaces. He did not wear crowns. He did not commission statues of himself in Jupiter's pose. He simply worked. And watched. And sometimes, when the streets were still, he walked among the stones and shadows of the Forum, hands behind his back, eyes tracing the ruins of a republic he had once revered. They called him cruel. He agreed. But cruelty, he believed, was not sin when it served survival. Better to be feared now than to see Rome eaten alive by another century of corruption. But even as he rebuilt Rome's bones, something in him began to crack. He was tired. His health faded. His skin grew pale, and his strength dimmed. He spoke less. Laughed less. He had taken everything: command, vengeance, history, and yet found no rest in possession. He had broken the enemies of Rome. But could a city born in liberty truly survive remade in fear? He said nothing of it. He only finished the work. Not king, not god, not tyrant crowned, but still, the city knelt. As marble laws were chipped and carved to match the sword he dealt. He gave them order, page by page, and taught them not to yearn. For freedom had its chance, and failed. Now justice would not burn. No one believed it when he said it. Not the senators he had installed like chess pieces. Not the generals fattened on his favor. Not the mobs, now quiet in their hunger. Not even his enemies, those few who remained breathing and braver than silence. Lucius Cornelius Sulla, dictator for the writing of laws and the salvation of Rome, announced he would resign. And he meant it. It came not with horns or marble proclamations, but in a speech. Calm. Measured. As if he were retiring from a minor post, not from the highest power ever seized in the city's history. He had, he claimed, restored order. The republic now stood on firm ground. The wounds had been cauterized. His task, complete. And so, in 79 BCE, after a reign written in fear and fire, Sulla laid down the fasces. The symbols of absolute command were returned. No guards accompanied him. No legion stood watch. He simply stepped back. Rome held its breath. Was it a trap? A test? Would he strike again at the first sign of defiance? But the trap never sprang. The streets remained open. The Senate met without his shadow falling across the chamber. And Sulla, the man who had walked through Rome with death in his pocket, disappeared to a quiet villa in Campania. There, on the sunlit hills overlooking the Bay of Naples, the butcher of Rome became a country gentleman. He wrote memoirs, entertained guests, drank deeply, and mocked philosophy. He bred horses. He gardened. He listened to the lyre. He laughed often, that cold, fox-like laugh that once preceded executions but now accompanied stories of past conquests. He said he regretted nothing. In private, his body betrayed him. The disease began in his flesh. Sores that would not heal. Pain in the joints. Ulcers that bled. His once perfect composure now interrupted by twitching, coughing, and a slow rot that crept across his skin. Some said it was leprosy. Others said it was divine punishment. His enemies whispered it was his soul pushing outward through the pores, a corruption that could no longer stay hidden. But Sulla bore it with his usual resolve. Pain was a tax, and he paid it. He had seen what few had, the inside of power's heart, the soft organs behind the hard rhetoric. He had ruled Rome with the clarity of a surgeon and the cruelty of a realist. And now he waited. Visitors came often. Senators, commanders, even young upstarts. One, in particular, fascinated him. A boy, ambitious, eloquent, arrogant, with eyes like knives and dreams that curled like smoke. His name was Gaius Julius Caesar. Sulla saw something in him. Not admiration. Not kinship. A warning. He told his companions, "In that boy, there are many Mariuses." They laughed. Sulla did not. He died not with a roar, but with a breath. In the quiet of his villa, among flowers and sea air, the last dictator of the Republic closed his eyes. No mobs cried for his return. No Senate decreed a funeral. But the city remembered. And in its bones, it trembled, not at what he had done, but at what would come next. He laid aside the laurel crown, and walked where none had dared. Through blood-stained streets into the fields, a lion grey and bared. He carved the state, then left it still, his shadow vast and low. And in that silence, all of Rome began again to grow. Rome did not mourn him. It studied him. Lucius Cornelius Sulla was gone, buried with modest rites in the Campus Martius, his tomb inscribed with the words he had chosen himself. No friend ever served me, and no enemy ever wronged me, whom I have not repaid in full. A fitting epitaph for a man who thought mercy a vice. Yet Rome lived on. Bled, bruised, hollow-eyed, but breathing. The Republic, such as it remained, creaked forward on bones he had broken and reset. His reforms endured, for a while. The Senate, reinflated with loyalists, flexed new muscles. The tribunes, muzzled and humiliated, became harmless. The courts ran as he had drawn them. Elections resumed. Laws passed. But something essential had shifted. The Rubicon had not yet been crossed, but the bridge had been paved. With each precedent Sulla had set, each name nailed to the rostra, each army turned inward, he taught Rome a new lesson. That the Republic was no longer sacred. It was optional. And others were watching. Crassus, who had grown fat on the spoils of proscriptions, now fed on real estate and influence, building a fortune vast enough to buy whole provinces. Pompey, once Sulla's golden boy, had tasted command and now hungered for more, cleansing Sicily, subduing Spain, all under the title, private citizen, but acting like a king in everything but name. And Caesar, the boy with the dangerous eyes, studied it all. He had once defied Sulla by refusing to divorce his wife, Cornelia, daughter of Cinna. Sulla had spared him only reluctantly, muttering, "There are many Mariuses in that one." Now Caesar wandered through the forum, quiet and calculating, a whisper on every breeze. He saw what Sulla had done. And more importantly, what he had left unfinished. For Sulla had stopped short. He had seized the state, and then handed it back. He had walked away from the crown when no one would have dared oppose him. He had built an autocracy, only to abdicate. Caesar would not make that mistake. Rome had learned to kneel. What it needed now was someone who would not let it rise. The institutions Sulla had tried to restore were now fragile masks. Behind them loomed power, personal, absolute, direct. The people had not forgotten the bread lines, nor the executions. But they had also not forgotten the stability. The safety that followed the purge. The illusion of peace. And so, the cycle began again. New generals. New wars. New populists and patricians, locked in death spirals with old names. The Republic wore Sulla's scars like tattoos, visible to all, erased by none. Years later, when Caesar would cross the Rubicon with his legions at his back, many would gasp and cry that the Republic was falling. But the Republic had already died. Not on that northern riverbank, but decades before, when Sulla first turned his army on Rome and made law a servant to the sword. He did not kill the Republic. He simply proved it could be killed. He left no crown, but left the mold from which all crowns were made. A city torn by iron hands, then soothed by ghostly blade. Though ash may cool and marble stands where fire once did dwell. The echo of his marching boots still haunts the Senate well.